Margaret Chen wiped down the last table in the hotel lobby, her movements practiced and efficient after 15 years of doing the same thing. It was Friday evening and the Grandview Hotel was buzzing with activity. Expensive cars pulled up to the entrance every few minutes, dropping off guests in sparkling dresses and sharp suits. She didn't pay much attention to them anymore. After so many years, wealthy guests had become just another part of the scenery, like the crystal chandeliers or the marble floors she mopped every morning at 6. Margaret was 52 years old. With graying hair she kept tied back in a simple bun, her uniform was always spotless, pressed carefully each morning before her shift. She took pride in her work even if nobody really noticed. That's how she preferred it, actually. Invisible. Quiet. Safe. "Margaret, we need you in the grand ballroom," her supervisor called out, checking something on her tablet. "The charity gala is tonight and I want everything perfect before the guests arrive." "Of course," Margaret replied, gathering her cleaning supplies. She'd worked enough events at the Grandview to know the routine by heart. "Check every table setting. Make sure the flowers look fresh. Wipe any fingerprints off the champagne glasses. Stay out of the way." The grand ballroom was the crown jewel of the hotel. Its ceiling stretched up 3 stories, decorated with painted clouds and cherubs that looked like they belonged in a museum. Tonight, round tables covered in white linen filled most of the space, each one topped with tall arrangements of roses and lilies. But the real centerpiece sat on a raised platform at the front of the room. A grand piano, not just any piano, but a genuine 1920s Steinway, with a glossy black finish that reflected the chandelier lights like a mirror. Margaret stopped when she saw it, just for a moment. A small ache bloomed in her chest, the kind she'd learned to ignore over the years. The piano hadn't worked in decades. Everyone at the hotel knew that. It was just for decoration now, something elegant to fill the space and make the ballroom look sophisticated. The keys were yellowed with age, and if you pressed them, most would either stick halfway down or make sad. Hollow sounds that barely qualified as music. She remembered the first time she'd seen it, back when she'd just started working at the Grandview. She'd been young then, only 37, still carrying the weight of choices she'd made 15 years before that. She'd asked if anyone ever played it. Her coworker had laughed. "That old thing. It's completely broken. Has been since before I started here, and that was 20 years ago." Margaret had never asked about it again. Now she moved through the ballroom with quiet efficiency, adjusting a napkin here, straightening a fork there. The flowers needed water in 2 of the centerpieces. She made a mental note and continued her rounds. The early guests started arriving while she was still working. That sometimes happened with these big events. People with money didn't always follow the schedule printed on their invitations. They arrived when they felt like it. Margaret could hear them gathering near the entrance, their voices loud with the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about much. She kept her head down and worked faster. If she could finish the flower arrangements in the next few minutes, she could slip out through the service door before too many people showed up. But then a voice cut through the low rumble of conversation. Loud, amused, the kind of voice that expected everyone to listen. "Look at this magnificent beast," the voice said. "When was the last time anyone actually played this thing?" Margaret glanced up despite herself. A man stood next to the piano, one hand resting possessively on its closed lid. He was maybe 40 years old, wearing a suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. His hair was styled with too much product, and he had the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. Several other people had gathered around him, also dressed expensively, holding champagne glasses even though the event hadn't officially started yet. "I heard it's completely broken," a woman in a red dress said, laughing. "It's just for show." "What a waste," the man replied. He lifted the lid covering the keys, revealing the aged ivory underneath. Hotels like this love their useless antiques. All style, no substance. His friends laughed at that. Margaret turned back to her flowers, hoping they'd lose interest and move on to something else. "You know what would be hilarious?" the man continued. His voice had taken on a different tone now, the kind that made Margaret's shoulders tense even before she understood why. "We should make someone try to play it. Can you imagine?" More laughter. Margaret worked faster, her hands moving on autopilot as she trimmed stems and arranged petals. "But who?" the woman in red asked. "None of us can play piano." No, the man said. "Not one of us. That wouldn't be funny. We need someone who will really struggle with it. Make it entertaining. Margaret's hand stilled. Something cold settled in her stomach. You there? She pretended not to hear him. Maybe he was calling to someone else. Hey, hotel staff! Yes, you with the flowers. The ballroom had gone quiet. Margaret could feel eyes on her back. Slowly, very slowly, she turned around. The man was looking directly at her, that strange smile still on his face. His friends had all turned to look too, phones already in some of their hands. Come here for a second, he said. It wasn't really a request. Margaret set down the flowers and walked toward the platform, her sensible work shoes quiet on the polished floor. Her heart was beating faster than it should. She knew this feeling. The same one she used to get before performances. Back when performances were still part of her life. Back when she was someone else entirely. What's your name? The man asked when she reached the group. Margaret, she said quietly. Margaret? Wonderful. Tell me, Margaret, have you ever played piano? The question hung in the air between them. Behind the man, Margaret could see the piano's keys, some of them slightly crooked, others sunken lower than they should be. A broken instrument that hadn't made real music in longer than most people could remember. She thought about lying. Thought about saying no and returning to her flowers and disappearing through the service door like she'd planned. But something in the way he asked, in the way his friends were already smirking, in the way phones were pointing in her direction, made her tell the truth. Yes, Margaret said. A long time ago. The man's smile grew wider. Perfect, he said. Then you won't mind giving us a little demonstration? Margaret stood there frozen as the man gestured grandly toward the piano bench. His friends were gathering closer now, forming a semicircle around the platform. She could see at least 4 phones pointed in her direction, ready to record whatever was about to happen. Go ahead, the man said, his voice dripping with fake encouragement. We'd love to hear you play. Someone in the group giggled. Margaret's hands felt cold despite the warmth of the ballroom. She looked past the crowd toward the entrance where her supervisor stood, tablet clutched to her chest. The woman's face had gone pale. She mouthed something that might have been, I'm sorry, or maybe, just go. Margaret couldn't tell. For a moment she considered simply walking away. She could apologize politely, say she needed to finish her work and retreat to the safety of the service corridors where people like this man never went. She'd spent 15 years perfecting the art of being invisible. Why break that pattern now? But then the man spoke again, louder this time, making sure everyone in the growing crowd could hear. Don't be shy. I'm sure you're very talented. After all, how hard can it be? Just press some keys, right? His friends laughed at that. Real laughter, the kind that made her feel small. And suddenly Margaret was 17 again, sitting in her guidance counselor's office, listening to him explain why she should be realistic about her dreams. She was 22 again, standing in the doorway of her childhood home, watching her mother try to hide how much the cancer treatments cost. She was 37 again, filling out her first job application at the Grandview Hotel, her music degree carefully left off the resume because it only made people ask questions she didn't want to answer. She'd spent so many years making herself smaller, quieter, less than she was. Something shifted inside her chest. Margaret reached up and slowly removed the hairnet she wore during work, folding it carefully and placing it on a nearby table. Then she took off her work gloves one finger at a time, setting them down next to the hairnet. The man watched her with growing amusement. Oh, we're getting the full performance. This is going to be good. Margaret walked to the piano bench and sat down. The wood was cool beneath her. She ran her fingers lightly over the closed key cover for just a second, feeling the smooth surface, remembering 1,000 other times she'd sat on benches just like this one. Then she lifted the key cover. The keys looked worse up close. Yellow with age, some of them chipped at the edges. She pressed middle C experimentally. It made a dull thunk and stuck halfway down. She had to pull it back up with her finger. Behind her, someone snickered. She tried D nothing. The key was completely dead, no sound at all. Having trouble? The man asked. His voice was syrupy with false sympathy. Maybe this was a bad idea. We wouldn't want to embarrass you. Margaret ignored him. She worked her way up the keyboard, pressing each key, listening carefully. Some worked. Many didn't. The ones that worked were badly out of tune, creating discordant sounds that made her wince. But as she tested each key, something was happening in her mind. She was mapping the keyboard, cataloging what she had to work with. This key stuck. That one was silent. This one was flat. That one sharp. It was like being given a puzzle with half the pieces missing and being asked to somehow still see the picture. The crowd had grown larger. At least 30 people now surrounded the platform, many of them holding their phones up to record. She could hear whispered conversations, people asking each other what was happening, why the hotel staff member was sitting at the piano. Margaret closed her eyes and let her hands rest on the keys. In her mind, she went through her options. She couldn't play anything too complicated, not with this many keys missing. But she needed something beautiful, something that would work even with the gaps. Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major. She'd learned it when she was 16, practiced it until her fingers could play it in her sleep. It was burned into her muscle memory so deep that even 15 years away from serious playing couldn't erase it. But she'd have to adapt it, change it, make it work with what she had. Margaret opened her eyes and placed her hands on the keyboard properly now, her back straight, her shoulders relaxed. She could feel the weight of everyone's attention, the phones recording, the man behind her probably already thinking about how many views his video would get. Let them watch. She began to play. The first chord came out wrong, discordant because 2 of the notes were missing. But Margaret didn't stop. She adjusted instantly, shifting the harmony, finding different notes that worked, that existed, that could sing. Her right hand started the melody, the famous opening phrase that everyone recognized even if they didn't know the name of the piece. But where notes were missing, she improvised, added grace notes, shifted octaves, found ways around the broken keys like water flowing around rocks in a stream. The laughter stopped. Margaret could feel the shift in the room, but she didn't open her eyes. She was somewhere else now. Not in the ballroom of the Grandview Hotel, but in the practice room at the conservatory. She was 18 years old with her whole future ahead of her. She was 20, playing her junior recital while her parents sat in the front row. She was every version of herself that had loved music before life made her choose between her dreams and her family's survival. Her left hand joined in, adding depth and harmony, working around the dead keys and the stuck ones, creating counter melodies that filled the spaces where the original piece couldn't exist anymore. This wasn't Chopin's Nocturne, not exactly. It was something new, something that could only exist because of the brokenness, not despite it. The room had gone completely silent except for the music. Margaret let herself sink deeper into the piece, her fingers moving faster now, more confident. There was a difficult passage coming up, one that required keys she knew didn't work. She approached it, modified it on the fly, turned a series of rapid notes into a cascading arpeggio that worked with what she had that sounded intentional, like it had always been meant to be played this way. Behind her closed eyelids, tears were forming. Not sad tears exactly, something more complicated, relief maybe, or grief for all the years she'd spent denying this part of herself. She moved into the final section, slowing down, letting the melody breathe. The broken piano sang under her hands, wounded but not defeated, limited but still capable of beauty. Margaret played the last note and let it fade into silence. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Then someone started clapping. The applause started with one person, then another. Then suddenly the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous clapping that echoed off the high ceilings. Margaret opened her eyes slowly, almost surprised to find herself still sitting at the piano bench. For a moment she'd been somewhere else entirely. Somewhere younger, somewhere full of possibility. The crowd had doubled in size. People from the hotel lobby had wandered in, drawn by the music. Staff members stood in the doorways, their work forgotten. Even the valet drivers had left their post to see what was happening. Margaret's hands were shaking slightly as she lifted them from the keys. She stared at her fingers like they belonged to someone else. These weren't the hands of a concert pianist anymore. They were rough from years of cleaning solution and hard work. The nails were short and practical, but somehow they'd remembered. After 15 years of silence, they'd remembered everything. The man who'd challenged her stood frozen, his phone still raised, but his expression completely changed. The smug smile had vanished. He looked confused, maybe even a little embarrassed, like someone who'd expected to watch a car crash but witnessed a miracle instead. His friends had lowered their phones too, One woman was wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. The man started, then stopped. He seemed unable to find the words. But before he could finish, an elderly woman pushed through the crowd. She was small, maybe 5 feet tall, with silver hair styled in an elegant bob. Her dress was deep purple, clearly expensive but understated. Pearls at her throat. She moved with purpose, her eyes locked on Margaret. "Excuse me," she said firmly. Not rudely, but with the kind of authority that made people step aside automatically. She reached the platform and climbed the 3 steps without hesitation, despite her age. Up close, Margaret could see she was probably in her late 70s, but her eyes were sharp and bright. "My dear," the woman said, reaching for Margaret's hands. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "That was extraordinary." Margaret tried to stand, but her legs felt unsteady. "Thank you, ma'am. I should really get back to work. Work?" The woman looked genuinely shocked. "After what you just did?" No, we need to talk. What's your name?" "Margaret Chen." "Margaret." The woman said it slowly, like she was committing it to memory. "I'm Evelyn Winters. Do you know who I am?" Margaret shook her head. Should she? The name sounded vaguely familiar, but she couldn't place it. Evelyn smiled, not offended, just amused. "I'm the director of the City Symphony Orchestra. Have been for 23 years. She paused, studying Margaret's face. "Where did you study music?" The question hit Margaret like a physical thing. Nobody had asked her that in so long. She'd almost forgotten that version of herself existed. "The Hartford Conservatory," she said quietly. "A long time ago." "Hartford?" Evelyn's eyes widened. "That's one of the finest music schools in the country. When did you graduate?" Margaret looked down at their joined hands. Evelyn's fingers were elegant, the nails perfectly manicured. Her own hands looked so different. "I didn't," she admitted. "I only completed 2 years. Why?" The question was gentle but persistent. Margaret opened her mouth to give the simple answer, the one she'd rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. "Family circumstances. Had to come home. Just one of those things." But something about the way Evelyn was looking at her with genuine interest and no judgment made the real story come spilling out. "My father lost his job," Margaret heard herself say. "The factory where he'd worked for 20 years shut down. Same month my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. I had a scholarship, but it only covered tuition, not room and board, and they needed help with the medical bills, with the mortgage, with everything. The ballroom had grown quiet again. People were listening, but Margaret barely noticed anymore. I told myself it was temporary." She continued. "I'd work for a year, maybe 2, help get them back on their feet, then go back to school. But my mother's treatment didn't work like the doctors hoped. She needed more surgeries, more medication. My father couldn't find another job that paid like the factory had. And then," she trailed off. The rest of the story was obvious, wasn't it? 1 year became 2, became 5, became 15. By the time her mother finally recovered, Margaret was 35 years old. Too old to go back to school. Too far removed from that world to even imagine returning. "I have a good job," Margaret said, more firmly now. "The hotel has been very kind to me. I have health insurance, a retirement plan. I'm not complaining about my life." "No," Evelyn agreed. "But you're not living it either, are you?" The words hung in the air between them. Margaret felt something crack open in her chest. Her supervisor appeared at the edge of the platform, looking mortified. "I'm so sorry for the interruption, Mrs. Winters. Margaret, I think we should— Patricia, isn't it?" Evelyn turned to face her. "I've attended functions at this hotel for years. You've always run a tight ship." Patricia nodded, looking relieved. "Thank you, ma'am. How long has Margaret worked for you?" 8 years. 8 years. Evelyn looked back at Margaret. "And you never knew she could do this?" Patricia shook her head slowly. "I had no idea." "Of course you didn't." Evelyn's voice wasn't unkind. "Because Margaret has been doing what so many talented people do. She's been making herself smaller, quieter, invisible, pretending that the gift she has doesn't matter because life got in the way." Margaret felt tears building behind her eyes. She blinked them back hard. The man who'd challenged her to play stepped forward. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "I owe you an apology," he said to Margaret. "I was trying to be funny, but I was just being cruel." "I'm sorry." Margaret nodded but didn't trust herself to speak. Evelyn wasn't finished, though. She turned to address the entire crowd, her voice carrying easily across the ballroom. I've been directing the City Symphony Orchestra for over 2 decades. I've worked with musicians who trained at Juilliard, at the Royal Academy, at every prestigious institution you can name. And what I just heard from this woman, adapting a complex piece on the fly, working around a broken instrument, making something beautiful out of limitation, that's the mark of a true artist. She turned back to Margaret. What are you doing tomorrow? Tomorrow? Margaret blinked. I work the morning shift, 7 to 3. Call in sick. I can't just... Margaret. Evelyn squeezed her hands again. How long has it been since you played for yourself? Not cleaning around a piano, not walking past one in a store, actually sitting down and playing? Margaret thought about it. Really thought about it. 15 years, she whispered. Since I left school? 15 years. Evelyn shook her head. That's 14 years and 364 days too long. Tomorrow I want you to come to the Symphony Hall. We have practice rooms, real pianos that actually work. I want to hear what you can do with an instrument that's not broken. I don't understand, Margaret said. Why would you? Because talent like yours doesn't just disappear, Evelyn said firmly. It goes dormant, maybe. It gets buried under responsibility and sacrifice and the weight of other people's needs. But it doesn't die. And I don't believe in wasting gifts. Margaret looked around the ballroom. All these people still watching, still waiting. Her supervisor looked uncertain but not angry. The man who'd challenged her looked ashamed. And Evelyn looked determined, like she'd already decided something and wouldn't take no for an answer. I'm 52 years old, Margaret said softly. So? Evelyn raised an eyebrow. I didn't become orchestra director until I was 55. What's your point? For the first time in 15 years, Margaret Chen smiled. Really smiled. What time should I be there? Margaret couldn't sleep that night. She lay in her small apartment, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had happened. Every few minutes she'd look at her phone where Evelyn had typed her address and the time. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. The Symphony Hall. Part of her still couldn't believe it was real. She got up around 5, gave up on sleep entirely and made coffee. Her hands were still trembling slightly. Not from nerves exactly. Something else. Excitement, maybe. Fear. Hope. All of it mixed together until she couldn't tell one feeling from another. By 9 o'clock, she was dressed in the nicest outfit she owned. A simple gray dress she usually wore to church. Flats that were comfortable but not too casual. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes looked different. Brighter somehow. The Symphony Hall was downtown, a massive building with tall columns out front. Margaret had walked past it hundreds of times over the years but never been inside. It was the kind of place that seemed to exist for other people. People with money and education and lives that looked nothing like hers. She almost turned around 3 times on the walk from the bus stop. But then she was standing in front of the main entrance, and a security guard was holding the door open for her with a friendly nod. Here for Mrs. Winters? He asked. Margaret nodded, not trusting her voice. 3rd floor? Take the elevator to your right. She's expecting you. The inside of the building took her breath away. The lobby was all marble and brass with posters for upcoming performances covering the walls. She could hear music coming from somewhere above, muffled but unmistakable. Someone was playing cello. The elevator moved slowly. Margaret watched the numbers light up. 1, 2, 3. Evelyn was waiting in the hallway when the doors opened. She wore slacks and a cardigan, much more casual than last night, but still with those same sharp, intelligent eyes. You came, Evelyn said, smiling. I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't, Margaret admitted, but you did. That's what matters. Evelyn gestured down the hall. Come, I want to show you something. They walked past several doors with small windows. Through each one, Margaret could see practice rooms with instruments. A young man working through scales on violin. 2 women playing a duet on flutes. A teenager struggling with what sounded like Beethoven. Evelyn stopped at a door near the end of the hall and opened it. Inside was a piano. Not an antique like the one at the hotel. This one was modern, perfectly maintained, its black surface gleaming under the lights. A Yamaha, Margaret noticed. Professional grade. It's all yours for the next 2 hours, Evelyn said. No broken keys. No audience. Just you and the music. Margaret stepped inside slowly. The room was small but beautiful, with acoustic panels on the walls and a window overlooking the city. I don't know what to play, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Play whatever your hands want to play, Evelyn said. I'll be in my office down the hall. Take your time. Then she closed the door and Margaret was alone. She sat down at the bench. The piano was positioned perfectly, the height adjusted just right. She touched the keys gently, almost reverently. They were smooth and cool, responding instantly to even the lightest pressure. Margaret played a scale. C major, simple, basic, the kind of thing she'd practiced 10,000 times as a student. It sounded perfect. Every note clear and true, she tried a chord. Then another. Then a progression. The piano responded beautifully to everything she did. No resistance, no dead keys, no stuck hammers. And then, without planning it, she started to play. Not Chopin this time. Something older. Bach. The prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered Clavier. One of the first pieces her teacher had given her, back when she was 14 years old. Her fingers stumbled at first. 15 years was a long time, but slowly, gradually, the muscle memory returned. The patterns that had been drilled into her brain through thousands of hours of practice came flooding back. She made mistakes. Lots of them. Hit wrong notes, lost her place, had to start sections over. But she kept going. After Bach, she played Debussy, then some Mozart, then a piece she'd written herself in college, something she'd completely forgotten existed until her fingers found it again. Time disappeared. Margaret had no idea if she'd been playing for 20 minutes or 2 hours. She moved from piece to piece, sometimes finishing them, sometimes abandoning them halfway through to try something else. She was in the middle of a Rachmaninoff prelude when she heard the door open behind her. Margaret stopped playing and turned around. Evelyn stood in the doorway and she wasn't alone. 2 other people were with her. A man about Evelyn's age with white hair and kind eyes and a younger woman, maybe 30, holding a folder. "I'm sorry," Margaret said quickly. "I lost track of time." "Don't apologize," Evelyn said. "Margaret, I'd like you to meet David Chen and his daughter Lisa. No relation to you, I assume?" Margaret shook her head. Chen was a common name. "David runs our community outreach program," Evelyn continued. "We bring music education to schools and neighborhoods that can't afford private lessons. Lisa coordinates the teachers." David stepped forward, offering his hand. "Evelyn told me what happened last night. Then she made me come up here to listen to you play for the last 30 minutes. Margaret's face went hot. "You were listening? I made so many mistakes. I'm so rusty, You're untrained," David interrupted gently. "Not rusty. There's a difference. Your technique needs work, yes. But your musicality is extraordinary. The way you phrase things, the emotion you bring to the music, that's not something we can teach." Lisa stepped forward now. "We're starting a new program next month. Piano lessons for kids in the Riverside district. Most of them have never touched an instrument before. We need teachers who understand what it's like to want something you think you can't have." Margaret looked between the 3 of them. "You want me to teach?" "We want you to do more than teach," Evelyn said. "We want you to be part of this community again. The community you left 15 years ago. David's program needs you, but more than that, you need it. You need to remember who you were before life made you forget." "But I'm not qualified," Margaret protested. "I never finished my degree. I haven't played seriously in 15 years, yes, we know," David said, smiling. "But you played last night on a broken piano and made grown adults cry. You played this morning on a working piano and reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Those kids don't need someone with perfect credentials. They need someone who understands struggle, someone who knows what it's like to have a gift and not be able to use it. The pay isn't much," Lisa added. $25 an hour, 10 hours a week to start. We provide all the materials and instruments. Classes are after school 4 to 7, Monday through Thursday." Margaret did the math in her head. 10 hours a week. That was $250. She made more than that at the hotel, but she could probably cut back her hours there, work out some kind of arrangement. "What about piano lessons for myself?" Margaret asked. "I meant what I said. I'm so far behind where I used to be." "We have someone for that too," Evelyn said. "One of our retired orchestra members gives lessons twice a week. She's agreed to take you on, no charge. Consider it an investment in your future." Margaret looked down at her hands, still resting on the piano keys. These hands that had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets and made beds for 15 years. These hands that last night had remembered how to make music. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked quietly. Evelyn sat down on the bench beside her. Because 23 years ago someone did it for me. I was 48 years old, working as an accountant, playing piano in bars on weekends to scratch the itch. Then someone heard me play and asked why I wasn't doing more. That question changed my life. She paused, looking at Margaret seriously. Talent isn't rare. The world is full of talented people, but most of them never get the chance to use their gifts. They get buried under responsibility and fear and the voice that says it's too late. I don't believe in too late, and neither should you. Margaret felt tears on her cheeks but didn't bother wiping them away. When do I start? 3 months later, Margaret stood in front of a classroom full of 12 children ages 8 to 14 and felt more nervous than she had in years. Okay, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Who can tell me what this is? She pointed to middle C on the upright piano the program had provided. A small boy in the front row raised his hand tentatively. A key. That's right. And what do we do with keys? Press them. Several kids shouted at once. Margaret smiled. Yes, but more importantly, we listen to them. Music isn't just about pressing keys. It's about paying attention to the sounds they make. She played middle C, letting it ring out clearly. Hear that? Now you try. One by one, the children came up to press the key, each of them delighting in the simple sound. Some pressed too hard. Some barely touched it. But they were all listening, really listening, in a way that reminded Margaret of herself at that age. Teaching, she discovered, was harder than she expected, but also more rewarding. These kids came from families that couldn't afford private music lessons. Most of them had never touched a piano before. They made mistakes constantly, got frustrated easily, and sometimes didn't want to practice. But every once in a while, she'd see something special. A flash of understanding in a child's eyes, the moment when struggling fingers finally played a scale correctly, the pure joy when someone completed their first full song. Those moments made everything worth it. Her own lessons with Mrs. Patterson, the retired orchestra member, were humbling. Margaret had forgotten how much she didn't know. Her technique had deteriorated. Her sight reading was rusty. She had developed bad habits from years away from serious practice. But slowly, week by week, it was coming back. Not just the technical skills, but the feeling. The reason she'd fallen in love with music in the first place. The hotel had been understanding about her schedule change. Patricia, her supervisor, had actually seemed happy for her. They worked out an arrangement where Margaret worked mornings 3 days a week, enough to keep her health insurance but giving her time for teaching and practice. The pay was tight. Margaret had to budget carefully, had given up some small luxuries. But she didn't mind. For the first time in 15 years, she woke up excited about her day. Then one afternoon in early December, Evelyn called her into her office at the Symphony Hall. Sit down, Evelyn said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. She looked serious, which made Margaret nervous. Is something wrong? Margaret asked. Did I do something? Nothing's wrong, Evelyn interrupted. Quite the opposite, actually. Do you remember the man from the hotel?
The one who challenged you to play?
Margaret nodded. How could she forget? His name is Blake Morrison. He runs a tech company, very successful, very wealthy, also apparently capable of feeling guilty. Evelyn slid a folder across the desk. He's made a donation to the symphony, a substantial one, specifically to our outreach program. Margaret opened the folder. Inside was a check. She had to count the zeros twice to believe it. $50,000. He said the video of you playing went viral, Evelyn continued. Over 3 million views at last count. People kept asking about you, about what happened after. So he tracked down your story, found out about the outreach program, and decided to do something useful with his guilt. 3 million people watched that. Margaret felt dizzy. More every day. You've inspired a lot of people, Margaret. People who gave up on their dreams. People who think it's too late to start again. Evelyn leaned forward. But that's not why I called you in here. Blake's donation comes with a request. He wants to fund something specific. What kind of something? He wants to pay for the restoration of the piano at the Grandview Hotel, the broken one you played, and once it's restored, he wants you to perform on it, a proper concert. All proceeds go to the music program. Margaret's heart started beating faster. A concert? Evelyn, I'm not ready for— Not now, Evelyn said quickly. 6 months from now. That gives you time to prepare. Time to work with Mrs. Patterson. Time to choose your program and practice until you're confident. I don't know. Margaret said, fear creeping into her voice. Playing for those people in the ballroom was one thing. But a real concert? With tickets and an audience expecting something professional? You're already professional, Evelyn said firmly. You just don't believe it yet. But you will. 6 months is enough time. Margaret looked at the check again. $50,000 could do so much for the program. New instruments. More teachers. Scholarships for private lessons. How could she say no? Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. The next 6 months were the hardest and best of Margaret's life. She practiced for hours every day, working through pieces she'd loved as a student and learning new ones. Mrs. Patterson was demanding but patient, pushing her to be better while understanding the gaps in her training. Her students at the outreach program kept her grounded. When she got too caught up in her own anxiety about the concert, she'd remember why she was doing this. For them. For every kid who needed to know that it's never too late, that circumstances don't have to define you, that buried dreams can be resurrected. The night of the concert arrived faster than Margaret expected. The Grandview Hotel's ballroom was packed. Every seat sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. The restored Steinway gleamed under the stage lights, looking exactly as it must have 100 years ago. Margaret stood backstage in a simple black dress, her hands shaking. She could hear the crowd murmuring, hundreds of voices blending together. Some of them were her students and their families. Some were symphony patrons. Some were people who'd seen the video and wanted to witness what happened next. Evelyn found her in the wings. How are you feeling? Terrified, Margaret admitted. Good, Evelyn said, squeezing her shoulder. That means you care. Now go out there and show them what 15 years of silence was hiding. Margaret walked onto the stage. The applause was overwhelming. She sat at the piano bench, the same spot where 3 months ago she'd expected humiliation and found transformation instead. But this time was different. This time the piano worked perfectly. This time she was ready. This time she wasn't a hotel worker playing a broken instrument as a joke. She was a pianist, claiming the identity she'd abandoned decades ago. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play. The music flowed out of her, months of practice and years of suppressed passion pouring into every note. She played Chopin, the same nocturne from that first night, but this time complete and perfect. Then Rachmaninoff, Debussy, Bach. Finally, she played the piece she'd written in college, the one she'd forgotten existed until her hands remembered it. When the last note faded, the silence lasted only a moment before the audience rose to their feet. The applause went on and on. Margaret saw her students in the front row jumping up and down with excitement. She saw Patricia from the hotel crying openly. She saw Blake Morrison standing in the back clapping hard, his expression full of something that looked like redemption. And she saw Evelyn, standing in the wings, smiling like a proud mother. Margaret stood and took her bow. As the applause continued, she looked down at the piano, this beautiful instrument that had once been broken and useless, now restored to its full glory, just like her. Later, after the concert, after the congratulations and photographs and interviews, Margaret sat alone in the empty ballroom. She played one more piece just for herself, quietly, gently, a simple melody that said everything she couldn't put into words. She was 53 years old. She was a teacher. She was a student. She was a pianist. She was exactly who she was supposed to be, and it was never too late to become that person.